cybersecurity really should be like renamed, I think, cyber risk management. It's not an IT problem. It's really a enterprise risk problem, if you will. And that clearly falls on the shoulders of the business officers in most of the schools that I've worked with. And that can be a bit daunting for them.
Welcome to the Net Assets Podcast, the official podcast of NBOA, Business Leadership for Independent Schools. This episode of the Net Assets Podcast is provided with the generous support of IMA. I'm your host, Jeff Shields, NBOA President and CEO, and today I'm pleased to welcome Bob Olsen, Managing Director at Hilco Global and a nationally recognized cybersecurity expert who advises organizations, including independent schools, on cyber risk, incident response, and security strategy. Cybersecurity has really become one of the most significant operational and governance challenges facing independent schools. From ransomware attacks and data breaches to the rapid emergence of artificial intelligence, school leaders must navigate an increasingly complex digital landscape while protecting their communities and their missions. Today, Bob joins us to discuss the current cyber threat environment, lessons schools can learn from recent incidents, and practical steps business officers can take to strengthen their cybersecurity posture. And with that, Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion, so thank you.
I'm really looking forward to it because cybersecurity is certainly something that I hear from almost every business officer I talk to. And then we'll get to the newest wrinkle in all that, which is artificial intelligence. But first, I have to ask you about something that's a little bit different. You serve as a volunteer firefighter in Cockeysville, Maryland. Now, how did you get involved in that kind of work?
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite things to talk about. My entire kind of career has been very mission and sort of service focused and prior military, and just was able to get into the fire service as well as the emergency medical services as a volunteer and just really enjoyed it. It's actually one of the reasons why I love working with the independent schools community so much, is because they also have that kind of mission and service focus. And so it's just been a really great way for me to serve the local community and some not so local communities over the years. And I just really have enjoyed it.
Thank you for your service in that regard. I always like to start these conversations with learning about someone's professional journey and how did you get here? So, how did your career lead you into cybersecurity consulting? And what ultimately brought you to working so extensively with independent schools? Now, I know you're a lifelong friend of our former board chair, Duncan Booth. So, did he have something to do with it? You tell me.
I wouldn't say necessarily he might disagree with me. I wouldn't say he had anything to do with getting into kind of the IT and cybersecurity space. He absolutely was instrumental in me getting involved with some local Baltimore schools. So it really started when he was at Roland Park Country School as the business officer there, was looking for some help around building out their security program. This goes back probably 10 or 12 years. Baltimore is a small community from a private school perspective. And so word of mouth. And so that was really how it was born. And then started to work with the Gilmans and the St. Paul's and some other schools in the area. And then again, was afforded the opportunity to go speak at some regional events where there were other schools, NBOA as well. And so I would say he was very instrumental in that. My career started, I was prior military, not in the tech field, but early on worked at Verizon in their IT and telecommunications engineering group. And that's really what sort of got me interested in technology. And then over the years, have served as CIO and CISOs for some for-profit entities, have served on a number of nonprofit boards, and currently do today as well, representing that IT cybersecurity subject matter expertise. And then I've been working with the independent school community for about a dozen years now and absolutely love everything about it.
I'm glad you took Duncan's advice. I think we're all the better for it. So it's not often I get to talk about a real live incident kind of ripped from the headlines that caught my attention and I know has caught yours. And it caught the attention of a lot of educators, which was the cyber attack involving Canvas, which is, for our listeners, the learning management platform that many schools and even colleges use across the country. Now, reports from that incident alone indicate that the breach affected thousands of institutions and exposed data from millions of users. So when you look at that incident particularly, did it strike you as something unusual, Or was it the kind of attack security professionals like you have been expecting for some time?
I wouldn't say I was surprised by the fact that it happened. Again, threat actors only have to get it right one time, and these companies have to get it right 100% of the time. So they have to literally be perfect. I think what I was surprised by was the number of institutions and just the overall end users impacted. It was almost 300 million end users impacted. And I think as schools in particular are ever more reliant on these enterprise-wide solutions that covers everything from development to SIS to LMS, all those acronyms we love in this space, it was not surprising to me that it was such a significant sort of impact on institutions just because it's integrated and ubiquitous across most of these schools that were affected.
What lessons should school leaders draw from that incident in particular?
So a few lessons that I would suggest folks sit and think about. One is, do they even really understand how dependent they are on systems and platforms like Canvas or Blackboard or Finalsite? The list could go on and on. Do they really understand the criticality of those platforms? Do they have the right steps in place from a resiliency standpoint so that if something bad does happen, do they actually have the ability to continue to operate? I know a number of the Baltimore area schools, some were all in on Canvas and their platform, and it was much more impactful than others where they were maybe just using the LMS piece or just maybe using a small piece. Step number one is just really inventorying, which might sound overly simplistic, but just really understanding these software as a service cloud-based applications that are in the school, how they're being used, the criticality of them, and then also the data that's within those. It is really important to understand underlying data and really where that sits from a systems and applications perspective because it becomes very hard to ensure that you're protecting it correctly from a security standpoint, doing all the privacy compliance that needs to be done if you don't even know what you have and where it sits.
So, Bob, as you just alluded to, Canvas is but one type of system that schools use. Let me tick off the others: financial systems, payroll data, donor records, HR information, facility systems. How do you think about the relative risks among these distinct types of systems? Are they all just as vulnerable as Canvas was, or are there different types of risks for different types of systems?
I think they all present similar risks. I think it really comes down to how are the schools using those different platforms. Some may have them much more tightly integrated, maybe using the full set of sort of functionality or capabilities, and maybe are putting even more sensitive data than maybe some of the other peer schools that are using it in a different way. The other thing that it's important to think about is a lot of these systems are integrated or interdependent, if not technically, then maybe from a process standpoint. One of the things to think about is I'm going to go back to the concept of resiliency is if one system in a set of systems that are very important to the organization to kind of continue to operate is broken or compromised or whatever, what is that sort of ripple effect or that kind of domino effect? So there may be systems that you would never think that would have any kind of potential impact on adjacent applications or process flows. But when it breaks, then all of a sudden you realize. And so one thing that schools can do is really kind of lay that map out, that essentially that inventory of applications and understand kind of what they have.
So you said that a school having a plan is probably the first most important step. I would imagine cyber insurance is part of that plan or that risk management. But what does that look like in practicality? Have you been in front of boards of trustees? Have you spoken to leadership teams? What does that developing a plan look like for a school? At least that initial step, and who do you advise should be involved?
So I think the plan really needs to look at it through the lens of risk management, right? From a technical perspective, like that the board of trustees that I've interacted with, the heads of school, the business officers, these are not intended to be technical subject matter experts. We're really coming to the table from a business risk perspective, which I think is very appropriate and very important. And not that technology is not part of that, but I think it really needs to be taking a step back and staying strategically, what do we need to operate as a school? What are we comfortable with? Not trying to secure and manage and mitigate every potential risk that's out there. Really, to me, it's all about prioritization and context. So, do you understand the critical systems, the types of data that you have? Do you feel like you have a strong security program and just security culture around the use of those tools? And then ultimately, in the event that unfortunately bad things do still happen, do we feel comfortable that our cyber insurance actually covers us in the event that something bad happens? And thinking through that kind of prioritization as it relates to what are the top 3 to 5 risks, and then going from there.
Independent K through 12 schools need a strong business continuity plan, not just an emergency plan, to stay resilient through disruptions. Key priorities include identifying risks beyond natural disasters, engaging stakeholders, protecting core operations like payroll and learning delivery, and testing and updating the plan regularly. Governance responsibility sits with the board, head of school, president, and key business leaders who must oversee and execute the plan to support recovery and accountability. If you're wondering how to get started, visit imacorp.com to connect with the IMA team and learn more about best practices for building a business continuity plan for your school. I know cyber insurance is important. I'd love to get your read on that really quickly, because from our friends that are a variety of insurance brokers in the community, cyber insurance premiums really started to skyrocket. And then they leveled off because my intel was telling us that we were doing better, that schools were doing better. They were doing some of the things that you've just advised on that last question. But what is going on in that space now? Because those premiums are going up again.
Overall, there's been, I think, a lot of positive developments for those organizations that have chosen to invest in their security programs. There's been a number of new entrants in the insurance carrier market that are very focused on small to mid-sized organizations that are willing to invest in essentially risk management and building out good security programs. Now, with that said, the threat actors continue to have a lot of success, which means these carriers are having a lot of claims, and then that ultimately translates to increased premiums. I am a big fan of, and again, insurance typically falls within the business office. I am a big fan of being an advocate for yourself. And what I mean by that is working with and through your broker to get some time with the insurance underwriter, to interact with whoever your preferred carrier is, or if it's multiple, and tell that story. Explain to them in a very personal way, kind of one-on-one or a small group, what you're doing as an organization or what you've done to, as best you possibly can, to protect the data and to not have bad things happen. I've seen that go a long way in both building that relationship. So that way, if something does happen, they have that sort of memory and they know that you truly care and are trying to do the right thing. I've seen it translate into anywhere from a 5 to a 15% reduction in premium from what they were, because in the absence of that interaction, they are looking at an application that was filled out with very little context, and they're going to generally err on the conservative side. So big advocate for self-advocacy as an organization.
I really like that. I think that's the really great nugget of advice, and I appreciate that, Bob. I want to shift gears a little bit. We all know artificial intelligence is really reshaping every aspect of our lives, but certainly school business operations. How is AI changing the complexities in the cybersecurity landscape for you?
So I think that with any new technology, there are always going to be positives and negatives, and some are going to be big positives and some are going to be big negatives from a meaningfulness perspective. So I think there are a lot of positives within, particularly within the security space for smaller organizations. There's a lot of tools that are very well known around endpoint management and just some things that are putting up those walls to keep the bad actors out, that are building or have built AI sort of agents into it. And so where that is super helpful for smaller organizations that are maybe more resource constrained is they're able to essentially leverage a virtual agent from a security engineer standpoint. So it empowers them to be a lot more responsive, a lot more sophisticated in their response, really without any sort of additional kind of cost associated with it. And schools, more than anything, more than any organization that I work with or client type, are some of the most lean from a resource standpoint when it comes to the IT and technology department. So anything that we can do to leverage technology to automate things and just have more intelligent decision making is always a positive in my mind.
So you're saying AI can escalate the threat, increase the threat, but also schools can use AI to help mitigate a potential threat. Is that where we are? And have you seen schools really exercising that?
There's a number of schools that are doing the first one, which is more around detection. And then a lot of schools, and quite frankly, just a lot of organizations in general, aren't fully comfortable yet of letting the AI agent automatically then make decisions without kind of a human in the loop. One of the challenges that even a full-time security person faces is the constant barrage of threats that are out there, and just trying to steal through that. And maybe there's 1,000 alerts that came in a week or whatever, which one should they focus on? And so AI is very helpful of essentially doing that triage and giving them, here are the top two or three, and allowing them to really focus their time and energy and expertise on where the actual real threats are, as opposed to getting lost in the noise.
So schools are using AI in a lot of different ways now. And again, it's a lot of experimentation. But is there any AI practice, whether it's on the program side or the operations side, that you've identified that inadvertently creates even more cyber threat for a school?
So there's a term, shadow IT, which now has been renamed as shadow AI. And a lot of organizations, especially in a school environment where you want to really promote critical thinking and exploration and just learning, I've seen a lot of schools that maybe didn't quite have robust policies in place, and their faculty and staff were allowed to go out and basically try out any of the free models and potentially upload things that shouldn't be in a sort of public domain. I think they were schools are quick learners, and so I would say most of the schools I'm working with now have corrected that behavior to a degree. One of the challenges of is there's a lot of sanctioned IT sort of software, if you will. So think Adobe as an example, Adobe Acrobat. Adobe Acrobat has AI built into it. It's got its own AI agent, and it comes standard. A lot of organizations, schools in particular, I think are struggling with these tools that have already been approved, and it was very well defined on the use case for it. And now all of a sudden, whoever that, in this case would be Adobe as an example, and it's not just Adobe, they've chosen to add in an AI agent native to their application. It's and maybe you can turn it off, maybe you can't. It's how do you walk that line between saying, "Yes, this is a proof software, but you can only use this functionality within it." And that just
That's really
becomes
interesting. That's really interesting. And again, a real advocate for prudent AI practices, and don't do whatever you can to mitigate anyone within the school environment, the school ecosystem, if you will, to going rogue and using other AI tools. And also pay attention to the existing tools you're using who are now introducing AI into them, and create policies or at least have discussions with your faculty and staff about how those embedded AI tools may be used. I think that's a really great insight. Thank you for that. So I just want to get to the common cybersecurity missteps that you've observed working with so many different kinds of organizations in schools. Is there top three that come to mind where you say these are just gaping holes for bad actors to walk straight through into a school?
I think, and we touched on it a bit when we talked about Canvas, but I think third-party risk management is definitely my top 3. If you look at any of the sort of published insurance claims data over the last few years, third-party related security incidents and breaches has continued to grow faster than any other, what we call a threat factor, or basically a way of getting in. And I think that's because a lot of folks don't think about their third party. And I'm not just talking about software applications. It could be facilities management. It could be security. It could be a variety of things from a functionality standpoint. So a big blind spot is not really understanding their full third party kind of risk landscape. And again, it starts with figuring out what you actually have in place. Who do you have relationships with, whether it's, again, software, facility, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Understanding that third party risk. And then again, prioritization and context relative to what should be done to make sure that you've got robust security around each of those. Cyber insurance is another one, just really making sure that you have adequate coverage for the threats that are most relevant and potentially most impactful to you as a school. And most schools are going to be similar in that, in what they're worried about, but there's definitely been some unique circumstances where we've wanted to help clients advocate to their carriers to maybe make some concessions on their insurance coverage details that maybe they wouldn't have thought about. And so an easy way to do that, insurance policies are hard to read. One of the things that I always recommend, again, around self-advocacy is say, as an organization, what are our top 3 to 5 risks that we're the most concerned about? And then go back through the broker with the broker to the insurance company and say, here, what we're most worried about, because these are the ones that we think are the most likely to happen and would have the biggest impact. Can you help us get comfortable that we have the appropriate coverage in place? And where you have gaps, the answer may not be we're just going to get more insurance. It could be that maybe there's some things that you want to do as an organization as it relates to policies or procedures or technology to shore that up and so that you feel more comfortable about it. And then the last piece that I'll mention is really thinking about where I see organizations, I'll say fail or maybe just not think about it the right way, is thinking of cyber risk and cybersecurity as this sort of unicorn. And what I mean by that is I think it's really important to think about cybersecurity as part of the overall enterprise risk management program. So if you have a risk committee, if maybe sometimes I see at schools, the audit committee also owns risk, leverage that existing resource and plug into that as opposed to creating this sort of standalone separate kind of cybersecurity. And really cybersecurity really should be like renamed, I think, cyber risk management. It's not an IT problem. It's really a enterprise risk problem, if you will. And that clearly falls on the shoulders of the business officers in most of the schools that I've worked with. And that can be a bit daunting for them.
Well, I think everything around risk management for schools can be daunting, but you got to tackle it. And I always advise just take it incrementally, just keep chipping away and chipping away at it. Bob, this has been so great talking to you and getting some really good practical advice. I want to end with, as you look ahead to the next few years, what developments in cybersecurity concern you the most? And what gives you hope that organizations, including schools, especially schools, will be able to meet those challenges? What's your crystal ball look like today, Bob?
I think I think we're going to see more and more organizations shifting to a resiliency model versus just purely how do I defend myself. I think the reality is with AI and some of the other rapidly emerging technologies that it's going to continue to be an unfair fight, unfortunately. And so, how does an organization quickly identify that something bad is happening and put containment around that and continue to operate and serve the mission of their students? Everybody asks about what is AI ultimately going to look like. I'm not going to pretend to know that answer, but I'm a glass kind of half full guy. What's particularly exciting for me, which I think is relevant to the school community, is I think there's going to be some enterprise level security capabilities that most organizations have not historically been able to afford for a variety of reasons. That AI is going to allow a lot of that sort of enterprise class security to be able to be implemented very cost effectively by small to medium sized organizations. That is a positive and I think very exciting for me.
I think that sounds exciting as well. And we're going to have to leave it there. And I just want to say, Bob, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights regarding one of really the most important operational challenges facing independent schools. And it's really that high up the list because it is changing so quickly for schools. And to our listeners, we hope today's conversation helps you think more strategically about managing cyber risk. And like Bob says, building resilience within your school community. Thank you again to IMA for supporting this episode of the Net Assets Podcast. Thank you for listening, and until next time, this is the Net Assets Podcast.